Okay, so today we're going to talk about learning target number 2, which is solving squared equations. So it says, I can use the inverse operation of square root to solve square root equations. So now you've learned a lot about what square roots are and how they work, and now we're going to do inverse operations and solving equations with them. So this should be a relatively easy learning target if you have mastered solving equations. So if you turn to page 10, we're going to start there. So the first question is, what is inverse operation? So maybe you already know this. You should already know this. But inverse operations are opposite operations. So for example, to undo addition, we use subtraction. And to undo subtraction, we use addition. To undo multiplication, we use division. And to undo division, we use multiplication. To undo a squared, we use square root. Okay, and that's what we are going to be, that's the new part. We learned that kind of in the first learning target, and so now we're going to use that when we're solving equations. So if you look, you should know how to solve this equation very easily. And the first thing you might do is look at the inverse operation of 4. To undo an addition of 4, we subtract 4 from both sides. And because the equal sign is there, we have to do it on both sides. So we get 3x equals 12. Then to undo the multiplication between 3 and x, we divide by 3 to get x equals 4. And therefore, we have found the value of x in that equation there. Okay, so now we're going to use it with square roots. So if you see a square root, as long as x squared is alone, like this it is here, you can go ahead and take the square root. So to undo x squared, we can take the square root of that. And if we're doing it to that side, we again have to do it to the same side. So the square root of x squared, what times what gives you x squared? Well, x times x gives you x squared. What's the square root of 49? And this is what we did before. X is 7. And if you check your answer, you can plug 7 in for x. And 7 squared is 49. So that checks. That works. Okay. All right. So whenever you get x squared alone, you can always take the square root. That's the inverse operation for squared. So what if it looks something like this, where it's a little bit different? So if I take this one, and my first step is to get this piece alone. So just like we did up here with the x, the first thing we did was subtract the constant number. So I'll add the 1 on both sides, and then I'll get 3x squared is equal to 300. Now to get x squared alone, I have to undo that multiplication. So I'm dividing by 3 on both sides, and I get x squared is equal to 100. And now I'm at the part where I can undo the square root, or the square. So I can undo this square, I get x equals 10. Square root of x squared is x, the square root of 100 is 10. So x is my answer. And again, I can check my answer if I'm not sure if I'm right. So I can do 3 times 10 squared minus 1 is 299. So again, remember in this you have to use PEMDAS. So I'm doing my order of operations. Exponents come first, so 3 times 100. 3 times 100 is 300. 300 minus 1 is 299. Therefore, my answer is correct and that one worked. Okay? All right. Last but not least, I can do this here. So if I do, this one is one that doesn't work out very nicely, but so again, I have to get this x squared by itself before I can take any square roots. So to get that x squared alone, I'm going to divide by 5 on both sides. So I get x squared equals 20. But if you notice, now I'm ready to do my square root because x squared is alone. If I take the square root of x squared, I get x. But I can't take the square root of 20. So this is where it depends. If it wants the exact answer, that's when you just leave it as x equals the square root of 20. Because remember, if it's not a nice root, it's irrational. So you're going to have to round it if you want to write it down. And if you round it now, it changes the answer. It's not exact anymore. So if you want the exact answer, you're just going to leave it as the square root of 20. If you want the rounded answer, you're actually just going to use your calculator to take the square root of 20. So if you use your calculator here, and you do square root of 20, you get this big long number. It might say round to the nearest hundredth. So in this case, the hundredth place is right with the 7. So I'm going to look at the 2 to tell me what to do with the 7. 2 is below 5, so I'm going to leave 7. So the rounded answer is about 4.47. Okay? So that's the rounded answer look like. So if it asks you for the exact, just leave it as a square root of 20. If it asks for the rounded, actually do it in your calculator. Okay? So if you flip the page, there's just a ton of equation practice. Okay? For these, I want you to leave it in exact form. So if you look, on page 11, you're going to leave it as an exact form. So that means leave the square root if it's irrational. And for the page 12, I'm going to have you round answer to nearest tenth if necessary. So if you don't have to round, don't, but if you do have to round to the nearest tenth. Okay? So finish this page, the 11 and 12, and then the assess yourself page, and then have the teacher check your answers.